So often when the sailor is at the helm, they say, steady as she goes, looking ahead, focusing, keeping the ship on course. This term keeps the ship going in the right direction. And oftentimes, what lies out in front of a ship is not always known. There could be storms, there could be all kinds of things back and forth, but keeping true to that true north is so important. And it's kind of this internal clock that ships have to have. And even though they're at full speed ahead, in the midst of a storm, so many things can keep their eyes distracted and keep them moving in different directions. And so it's very hard. And life is like that for us. And so we have to have that true north in our life. And over these past few weeks, as we've been talking about finish line living, it is a reminder. There's storms raging. There are distractions. There's confusing messages. There's all kind of things out there. And this time has been a reminder to us to make sure Jesus is that compass for us, that guide for all that we do in so many different ways. And so this process of being disciples on this ship, on this journey, on this race, it's a constant journey, a constant battle. There's a lot of people in our culture that are exhausted. There's a lot of people in the church that are just exhausted in these past days and weeks. And so we tend to kind of get sidelined at times, and we forget Jesus as that true compass, that true guide for all that we are. We tend to flounder around in the seas of hunger pangs and other things that, whether it's addictions or struggles or material things, agendas, issues, all kind of stuff just kind of gets in our way. And today we want to spend some time thinking and reflecting on this finish line living that's a bit more that we can think about, because we really start realizing who Jesus is for us in these weeks. We begin to see how we're going to get there. What is the source for all that we need? Jesus alone is that bread of our life. Jesus alone is the one that can't be replaced, can't be imitated. It's Jesus alone that fills us up with grace and love and peace that goes beyond all understanding. And so it's reaching for that Jesus as we really truly live out this purpose and time of being finish line runners and pursuing this. You see, Jesus is that great reviver for us. Jesus is that great life giver. And so as we conclude this series, I've invited again Shannon Karafanda. I'm so excited to have some time with her the past weeks. And you heard from her a couple weeks ago. And so we want to unpack a little bit of some of these distractions that happen in our life, in our world, in our discipleship journey, just realizing that, we've learned a key phrase these last few weeks during the pandemic. We've learned a phrase called contact tracing, and so we need to know where we are. This kind of can apply to our thinking as well when it comes to being faithful followers of Jesus. If we look around, sometimes we kind of go, where did that thought come from? What affected that in us? Where did that stinking thinking come from? It kind of throws us off course sometimes. In the text today, Jesus has the same kind of question for his disciples and others. And he brings up this very important question that so often we are challenged with about denying ourselves, taking up our cross, and following. And he asks a really important question, two big questions. He says, why would people gain the whole world but lose their lives? And it seems like, got that figured out. But if we're really honest, it's something we battle, we still struggle with. And then he adds a second question. He goes, what will people give in exchange for their lives? And we do it, don't we? If we're honest, we exchange things. So we'd like to chat a little bit. Shannon's going to offer a little bit to us. And Shannon, I know, how would you respond to those questions? Jesus got some big things to ask us. What would you say?
Yeah, those are pretty deep questions. And Matt, thank you so much. I love that imagery of the boat or a ship going somewhere. And because we always think about the destination, we know where we're headed as Christians. We have that destination in mind, and we know what Jesus says to do. And so we start down a path, but most of us aren't sailors. So we don't necessarily think through that image of a storm, but that is perfect for right now, because normally when you have your destination in mind, there's like 2 or 3 paths to follow, and that's the way you go. So you know where your destination is. But when you're in a boat, you have a destination. There's not a path that's the same every time, because the path keeps changing. And during these times, our path has changed like every single week. There's something new. There's 2 hurricanes this week. That's a totally different path for people than anyone's ever really thought of. And a lot of that does have to do with our thinking. So when Jesus asks these questions, we are often distracted by our thoughts, our own thoughts, that we don't know where it came from. If you're like me, sometimes you'll have this argument with someone in your head that you never actually had, and you end up mad at this person that you never had a conversation with. And we have to trace back, where did those thoughts come from? One of the things that I like to think through when I'm trying to think of getting to my destination and making sure that I am going in the right direction is something that a lot of people may have heard of if they're in the realm of education or educational psychology, and it's called growth mindset. There's a book by Carol Dweck called Mindset that transformed how I thought about everything. When I first started reading it, I was like, oh, of course this makes sense in business. Of course this makes sense in education. But then it got to relationships and I went, oh, I never thought about that. I always thought that person could never change. And therefore I didn't need to change how I thought. But that's not true. I can change. And when I change, people around me change as well. It may not be the same amount, but we all are transformed by how we start to think about things. And people either have a fixed mindset, this is the way things are and they're never going to change, or a growth mindset, this is the way things are, but look at how they could be. And that's how I see Jesus talking in these questions is, yeah, this is how things are, but this is how it could be. And there's so many possibilities when you open up your mind to that. So there's some things that I like to look at when I like to change my thinking. And there's an acronym for this that actually is the word BRAIN. So if you look at the word BRAIN and you break this down into these steps, this will help you to transform your thinking. And the first one is that you're supposed to break it down. If there's a big thing that you're looking to change or start to think about, you break it down into smaller pieces. No one goes out and says, you know what, I need to train for a marathon, so I'm going to run 23 miles tomorrow, 24. You start out with a few miles, and then you add some more. You might do some interval training. You break it down into smaller steps and then build your mileage as you go. So breaking it down. And then you might want to break it down a second time. You might say, you know what, by the end of the month, I'm going to be at 5 miles. So this week, here's what I'm going to do. You want to break it down into steps that are manageable. You mentioned exhaustion. Pandemic fog is a real thing. I find I have one thing per day I can get done, and the rest just kind of happens in a daze and a haze, and I don't know if I did it right, because this is all new paths that we're going through. There is a storm every single moment, and it can be exhausting. So breaking something down into smaller pieces makes it more manageable. And this is something I think that's important for mental health as well as spiritual and physical health. That is super, super, super important. So break it down, repeat. So that's B and that's R. And then the third one is to take an action. If there's so many times when we transform our thinking and we don't actually start to put it into action. So taking that action first allows us to start to evaluate what happens when we actually put this into practice. A lot of times people want to get things perfect in their brain before they take action.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that. There's a lot of times I don't want to jump into the deep end, but sometimes that's the fastest way to get in and cool off. So take action, that's the third one. Then the fourth, and this is, you would flip, a lot of people flip these, is to find out more information. So you would think you'd get all the information first and then take action, but a lot of times you will learn new ways that haven't even been thought of yet if you take action first. Then gather some information to make it a deeper experience. And then the last one, this is the end, never give up. We are in a long, long race. We know where we're headed. We're going to need endurance for this race. So there are times when you're going to fail, and that's okay. What did you learn from that? What is the next thing that you need to do to take this action again and to repeat this process? Because we're on a journey of transformation with Jesus, and it's something that we're going to, continue to be on for quite some time. So Matt, sometimes I kind of hinted at this lag between when you think and when you do, what would you say to inspire people to take that action just a little bit sooner?
Oh, thank you very much. And I tell you, from the very start of this whole series, I couldn't help but think about Nike's slogan, just do it. And granted, it has stuck around for decades. They've used it, they've leveraged it. I mean, it's a fantastic, and it matters. It really does mean something. I'm fascinated by athletes who have trained themselves and prepared themselves, and literally they could do everything almost in their sleep. We joke about that so often. And a really well-trained athlete does that. I wonder if a really well-trained disciple can do the same thing, but wonder if it's not our mental game that gets us stuck. We overthink it. Again, we try to get too much information. Maybe we just need to just do it. And I've had people over and over come to me and say, well, I'm waiting to hear from God on this, or I'm waiting on Spirit. There's discernment. That's true. But you know what? Sometimes everything is right in front of us. I wonder if it's not fear and distrust that tends to hold us back. So again, it comes back to, it's a mental game. We really have this challenge, and we know what we need to do. Are we willing to just take a step? It's kind of that going from 0 to 1 that makes the big difference. And so I think for even just like for athletes who are ready, they're prepared, they are sharp, they're on the game. It's just that slight difference in the mental. Just do it. Just take that action, move out in the right step. And I wonder sometimes if there aren't some things we're holding on to that are actually holding us back. And so it's almost in that mental game. So the Nike slogan, just do it, go for it, step out, make it happen. I'll never forget a number of years ago watching the movie The Greatest Game. It's a golf movie. So those of you who know I'm a golfer can appreciate this, but it's a fantastic story. It's based on the true story of Francis Ouimet winning the US Open years and years ago. And he beat some of the top players in the world. And there's two main characters in here. And again, Francis is a young guy, but he's just got this very natural talent. As a matter of fact, one scene in the movie, his trainer, his teacher is telling him, do you realize you just shot a 71 on the hardest golf course in New England? And in the movie, you see Francis in this character. He's like in another world. He's in a whole nother zone. He's stepped up a whole nother level. And you kind of go, oh, like that's what I want. And he just does it in the moment. He trusts that moment to move forward. I think that sometimes it's like that for us with walking with Jesus. Jesus is that life for us. Just do it. Just trust that in that moment. Now, it's interesting. There's another character in that movie, Harry Vardon, who's one of the key top golfers at that time. He's one of the key characters in this movie. And he's come from this place in his background where things of his past, mental things of his past, hold him back. And you see this evolution in this story with him. And that's why I go, it's a just do it mental game mindset. You know, the Spirit will guide us. The Spirit will lead us and provide for exactly what we need if we're just willing to just do it. If Jesus is this way for us, is this life for us, what does that look like? I have to keep coming back to what it means to be disciples. We have these ways of living out our faith, ways of living out the love and grace that God's given to us, and we call it the means of grace. We have works of mercy that we do. We have our personal practices, which are super important, but we have ways that we live out and we care for one another, seeking justice, standing up for people in places, sometimes just visiting the sick and visiting those who are hungry, giving to these are things that we're called to just do. And it echoes Jesus' call in this passage once again to deny self, take up your cross, follow me, go with me in these directions. And so I think it's just a just do it kind of thing at times. This finish line living, just do it kind of faith. And so Shannon, I know you yourself are a just do it kind of minister. You've got some pretty creative ways that you've done that. What's been your experience? Share with us a little bit more about that.
Well, I have been one to put things in action for quite some time. But over the years, I have been intrigued by the idea of radical acts of random kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of just been something that has just, my heart and my head can't let go of the idea of doing more and more and more in these. So sometime last year, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to start a movement of Holy Mischief? And so I sat down with a friend and we did the break it down procedure. And so we had sticky notes and we were putting them all over the board. This is what it could look like. Here's how it needs to start. Had it all planned out right before the pandemic. And so we started launching into a Lenten challenge of Holy Mischief type of things, grew a Facebook group with that, an email list with that. The pandemic hit, and I never realized how important it was until people didn't have the same ways to process their faith that they were used to. We were used to going to church, hearing an inspirational message, coming home, maybe we were inspired to do something. And now we couldn't actually physically go to church. We couldn't reach out to our neighbors in the same way that we used to. Everything flipped. And I started really looking at what does this movement look like? And I see it as a flipped model of church. Go and do something and then process where we saw God in that.
Oh,
it's
nice.
Putting the action first and then processing. Now there's some steps to Holy Mischief that I like to think of because it helps me to break it down in my mind, but these aren't necessarily steps that you have to do in a certain order. This is just kind of a way that this sort of manifests in life. The first one is to listen to the Holy Spirit, but it's not just, I'm going to pray and listen and pray and listen and pray and listen, because as you said, we can get stuck in that loop and never get out of it. But it's more of that pray without ceasing. Looking for where God is at every single moment of the day, as often as we can, because we know those distractions will pull us away from that. Because God will put people in your path, whether it's through a text message, a phone call, a Facebook message, just something you'll see that even during a pandemic, you can connect with someone and make their day a little bit brighter. So that's taking that authentic activation. How can I put this into action in a way that's not, I'm checking a box. I don't want to just check a box that I did something good. I want to do something that God is leading me to do. And sometimes it's not about the other person. Sometimes it's about me. I have to get out of my comfort zone and do something nice for someone else. Normally I wouldn't do this. I can't tell you how many people throughout this process have said, well, I don't know if this counts. Normally I wouldn't do this, but, and there's something about issuing a Holy Mischief challenge to people that causes them to say, okay, I'm going to try it. That has been really, really, really beautiful. And once you listen and you start to take some action, put that into a habit. Make it a habit that every day I'm going to see how I can connect to God and connect to other people. And then the last step that I think is out of some people's comfort zone is to share the story. It seems that it's easier to share a story of me doing Holy Mischief than it is for me to go up to someone and say, hey, do you know Jesus? Let me tell you the story of Jesus. That's a harder thing for people to leap into. Now, some people can do it great. Some people are born evangelists and they know how to do it, and it doesn't come off as inauthentic. But for most of us, I can share. Let me tell you about the time when I was able to collect all of these letters for a physician in Rome who was a pulmonologist, and we flooded her inbox with all of these letters. And how much it meant to her and that she was moved to tears. That is putting our faith into practice. Now, you talked about the means of grace. There's the works of piety, which are more things that we do to show that we love God. And then there's those works of mercy that show we love neighbor. And I think both are important. There's some really cool things that happen in our brains and in our bodies when we put these means of grace into practice. When we're doing works of piety, typically we focus on our breathing, or maybe you don't even know that you're focusing on it, but when you pray, your breathing slows down a little bit, you breathe a little bit deeper, your blood pressure lowers a little bit, and you begin to get into a calm state where you can be a little bit more aware about what's going on around you. Something similar happens when we do Holy Mischief or actions that are loving our neighbor. When we do an action that is altruistic, where we're being kind to someone else, and we see the joy and thankfulness in the other person, the same triggers in our brain for joy light up too. It's like when you go to a movie And like, I don't know how many of you have seen E.T. and cried. If you didn't cry, I think there's something probably wrong with you, but that's just a side note and I won't judge. But you see a movie and you cry. That's because you're empathizing with the characters in the movie. And the same thing happens though when it's something that's of joy. If you give someone a gift and it brings them joy and they light up, the same thing happens to you. Now, the wonderful thing about the means of grace is that you can do them individually. So you can do them on your own. You can pray on your own. You can do an act of kindness on your own. But you can also do them in a group and a body of believers. And this is what the church is for.
Yeah.
When you start to pray as a group of people, everybody's blood pressure lowers just a little bit. Everyone's breathing starts to sync up. And when you tell a story in church, brainwaves start to sync up as well. It's a fascinating scientific thing that goes on when we're a body of believers. Now, when we do acts of mercy together, instead of adding the benefits to each person, it starts to multiply. So I like to think of this as when you're watching sports. You mentioned golf. I love baseball. I miss summer baseball. When I'm watching baseball, I can get excited when something happens. And I can be by myself and I can yell and scream and get out of my chair. But it does not compare to when I'm in a stadium and there's 40,000 people in the stadium with me. It's packed and something big happens. There's a great catch, a home run, and everybody stands up. They're on their feet. They're all screaming. Everybody's high-five. That energy is multiplied because of the number of people that are doing that together. And that is the energy that happens when the church is at its best, taking action, loving God, and loving neighbor. And to me, I just think that those are beautiful, wonderful, wonderful things. So Matt, how do you see the people of Hickory Flat putting these things into action? What do you think is the next step for them?
Thanks, Shannon. And this has been a great conversation. I'm grateful to you for the time the last couple of weeks. And as we've been, we're on this journey. All of us are together. And it's fascinating to see how Hickory Flat has it. Peachtree City has it. Every single individual church and community of grace has this race, this journey that we're on, this thing before us. And Jesus is the one that we're following. And so today, as we've talked about, the finish line living is kind of being this no distractions. We have to have Jesus as our life as we follow. And that way of life, that way of being, that's what I see as the opportunity before us, to have that right mindset and then action that follows that. When we put ourselves in that right place, it's that whole love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. They follow each other. They go together. Jesus becomes that compass, becomes that one we follow as our source, who is our strength, who is the courage for our living, the truth for how we operate, and the life that we live. And when we do that, now we as Hickory Flat and every congregation are able and willing to move past the things that exhaust us, that distract us, that create a little more confusion in our day and our week, and help us to faithfully live as we're called to live and be about that eternal life, that eternal grace for our lives and for the world. The world longs for that. And so I challenge us this day and every day to make sure that we turn our head the correct direction. Even for instance, don't veer off. Don't lean into those other things. It might get us off in the ditch somewhere. We don't want to miss the turn. We want to go where Jesus is going. We want to lead where the Spirit's leading. We don't want to be hindered. We don't want to be confused. So let's keep our eyes on Him, the finish line that we're headed for. Get ready for this ride, because it's going to be the ride of a lifetime. And there are no distractions. So this finish line living makes Jesus the life that we live together. So make Jesus the source of your life, the strength of your life, the courage that you have and you need, the truth that defines your living, and then the life that you live with. Shannon, thank you for this time. Blessings to all of us. May we be faithful followers of Jesus in all these ways. Amen.
Thanks, Matt.